One private jet flight turned Hollywood's most untouchable marriage into a years-long war over children, abuse allegations, and a French winery. But this wasn't just a breakup. It became a high-stakes battle. This isn't just a celebrity breakup. It's a war that never really ended. You're looking at two of the most famous people on the planet, tied together by 6 children, a global image that once looked untouchable, and a split that detonated in public after a 2016 private jet incident. That moment didn't just end a marriage. It opened a fight that would drag through custody proceedings, abuse allegations, and a legal battle over Château Miraval that kept pulling both sides back into court years later. And that's what makes this story different. The stakes were never only emotional. They were parental, financial, reputational, and painfully permanent. Every new filing had the power to reshape how each of them would be seen. As a parent, as a former partner, and as one half of a brand the world had spent years turning into modern Hollywood royalty. For you as a viewer, that's the tension running underneath everything. On one side, Brad Pitt, one of the biggest movie stars alive. On the other, Angelina Jolie, equally famous, equally powerful, and just as capable of taking the fight into a courtroom instead of a tabloid. This was never going to be a clean split, not with 6 children at the center, not with allegations this serious, and not with a French winery becoming its own battlefield after the marriage was already over. What began as the collapse of Brangelina turned into something colder and more relentless, a prolonged struggle over truth, control, credibility, and legacy. The litigation was not. And to understand how it got this far, you have to start with the incident both sides could never fully move past. What happened next would shape the case and everything that followed. Before you get to the filings, the countersuits, and the years of legal trench warfare, you need to understand the pressure chamber this was happening inside. By the time everything broke open, this was not just a marriage with hard feelings. It was a family with 6 children, a public image built over years, and shared interests that could not be untangled with one signature. That matters, because once the split began, nothing could stay contained. A dispute over parenting was never only about parenting. Abuse allegations were never only private accusations, and a fight over Château Miraval was never only a business disagreement. Each part fed the others. That is what made this collapse so combustible. In ordinary divorces, one conflict can sometimes be isolated from the next. Here, every issue raised the stakes everywhere else. If one side pushed in court over custody, it affected public credibility. If allegations entered the record, they changed how every later move would be interpreted. If a financial battle over a winery kept going, it guaranteed the relationship would stay adversarial long after the marriage itself was finished. And because both people at the center were globally famous, the usual boundary between private family conflict and public narrative was thinner than ever. Even when proceedings were meant to be handled through legal channels, the broader story was never going away. The question was not just who would win a motion. It was who would control the meaning of the breakup itself. That is the context you need to hold on to from here forward. Not a single explosion, then silence. More like a chain reaction that kept finding new fuel. And once you see that, the private jet incident stops looking like an isolated disaster. It becomes the spark that ignited everything after it.
$1.3 million in child support. He also loaned Jolie $8 million.
Years after their split first stunned Hollywood, the battle between Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie enters its most revealing chapter. What unfolds here captures the aftermath in real time, as divorce, custody, and public scrutiny collide. But this is where the fight changed, and why everything after mattered. This is the point where the story stops being a celebrity breakup and becomes a legal war with consequences that keep multiplying. After the private jet incident in 2016, the center of gravity changed. Fast. The issue was no longer whether this marriage was failing, it was whether the end of it would be defined by ordinary divorce terms, or by allegations serious enough to shape custody, public credibility, and every negotiation that followed. That distinction matters, because once abuse allegations entered the picture, nothing else could be handled in a vacuum. Now every decision carried two meanings at once. A move about parenting time was also a statement about trust. A legal filing was also a reputational event. And because there were 6 children involved, the stakes were immediate. This was not just about who felt wronged. It was about who would have authority, who would be believed, and what version of the family's collapse would carry weight in court. That is why this chapter is the turning point. The private crisis became a structured fight. Positions hardened. The split stopped looking temporary, emotional, or salvageable. It became adversarial. From here on, each side had to think not only about the next hearing, but about the long trail behind it and the damage ahead. And this is where you start to see the shape of the years that followed. The custody battle did not emerge separately from the incident. It grew out of it. The abuse allegations did not stay isolated from later disputes. They cast a shadow over all of them. Even the Château Miraval conflict makes more sense once you see this shift. After trust breaks at this level, no shared asset stays just an asset. Next, that private rupture moves fully into the courtroom, where the fight gets colder, slower, and even more consequential. What happened next changed the fight and explains why this stage mattered. What came next was not a clean break. It was attrition. After the split, the fight moved into a phase that can look quiet from the outside and feel endless on the inside. That matters because this is where the real damage of a family war often compounds. Not in one headline, in repetition, in filings, negotiations, disputed accounts, and the long grind of trying to turn a shattered relationship into a workable legal structure. For you, the key shift is this. Time itself became a factor. The longer the custody dispute stretched on, the less this was about a single moment in 2016, and the more it was about who could endure, who could shape the record, and who could persuade the court that their version of events should guide the future of 6 children. In a case like this, delay is not neutral. Children get older, family routines change, temporary arrangements can start to harden into lived reality, and the allegations did not simply fade because the divorce existed on paper. They continued to matter because they touched the most sensitive question in the entire case. That kept the legal fight emotionally radioactive. Every new step carried the pressure of the original rupture, but now filtered through lawyers, judges, and a public that never fully looked away. Then there is the other reason the aftermath matters. The war did not stay contained to custody. The Château Miraval dispute shows you how a collapsed marriage can keep producing new battlefields years later. Once former partners no longer trust each other, shared property is not just money. It becomes leverage, symbolism, and another way to relitigate power. That is why the aftermath is not a footnote to the breakup. It is the breakup stretched over years, and next you see how that prolonged war spills into the Miraval fight, where the marriage ends, but the conflict doesn't.
Sort things out, but they are headed there, and it's less than a month.
The exes have been batted. In August, Jolie filed public court documents accusing Pitt of not paying.
But this wasn't just a breakup. It became a fight over everything. By the end of this fight, what you are really looking at is not a celebrity breakup. It is a rivalry built around control. Control of the story, control of the family's future, control of what the collapse is understood to mean. That is the matchup. On one side, a battle over credibility. On the other, a battle over consequence. And neither of those things stays confined to one courtroom or one filing. Once allegations this serious enter the center of a divorce involving 6 children, every later dispute carries extra weight. Custody is no longer just a schedule. Property is no longer just an asset. Even time stops being neutral. It starts rewarding whoever can better withstand the grind. For you, that is the real stake here, not simply who wins, because cases like this rarely produce a clean cinematic winner. The deeper question is whose version of the family breakdown becomes the lasting one, legally, publicly, and privately for the children who have to live beyond the headlines. That is why the conflict kept expanding instead of burning out. The issues were too foundational to compartmentalize. Parenting, reputation, money, trust, ownership. Each one fed the others. And that is also why the Miraval War matters so much in the larger Brangelina story. It shows you that the split did not end when the marriage ended. The original rupture kept echoing into new terrain. A winery lawsuit in that context is not just about business. It is about unresolved power between two people who once built a joint empire and then spent years fighting over what survives its collapse. So if you have followed this story as gossip, the ending is harsher than that. This is what prolonged family warfare looks like when every stake is amplified by fame. And even after all these years, the final question still hangs there. What exactly gets left standing when the brand is gone and only the damage remains? Thanks for watching. If you found this story insightful, you can like the video and subscribe for more. We've got more biographies and complicated Hollywood lives coming soon, and I'd love to have you with us for the next one.